one more time. I'm not giving up.
Salutations and fist bumps, folks. Welcome back to The Grid. This is a breakdown of all the Easter eggs, references, Marvel connections, and secrets hidden in the music, and there were a lot of them, and little details that you might have missed about Fantastic Four: The First Steps. Director Matt Shakman's film features rich background details throughout this new universe and new world, and I've been waiting for this video since I started this channel for a very long time, and I woke up a lot of days very early to actually break all this down, and I'm excited to show what I found. So, as per usual around here, we have a lot to talk through and not a lot of time. Let's ride. So, if you didn't know, this is a new phase for Marvel in Phase 6 and the beginning of the upcoming universal reset for the MCU. Now, it is set inside of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but in this particular movie, it is now set in a completely different universe than we've known inside of the MCU collectively in Earth 616. Instead, we're in Earth 828, which we learned from the credits is actually Jack Kirby's birthday and is named after his birthday of August 28. And yes, there will be more about Jack Kirby later on, by the way. But it's fitting that it starts this movie in a totally different way than what we've known in the MCU prior to, especially for projects that started in Earth 616. So we don't get our usual fanfare for the MCU that we are so accustomed to seeing at the beginning of MCU projects, which actually started back in 2016's Doctor Strange, with music that was also composed by Michael Giacchino, who also scored this iteration of the Fantastic Four. We did see a version of that in the new Avengers/Thunderbolts with the character of Sentry, but we did not see it earlier this year in February's Captain America: Brave New World. And while this movie doesn't take place in the same universe as Iron Man, it's assumed that these characters will travel to Earth 616 at some point, like we saw in the post-credit scene for the new Avengers. And all of these cast members more than likely will play a huge part in Avengers Doomsday. Now, before we get further into this, I want to take some time to talk about this team in the Fantastic Four and why they mean so much to so many. The Fantastic Four are significant to comic fans as Marvel's first family, whose 1961 debut launched the Marvel Universe in comic form. When a bankrupt Marvel rehired Jack Kirby, his collaboration with Stan Lee sparked a creative explosion. Unlike the formal superheroes of the time, the Fantastic Four were a relatable family who argued and struggled, setting the template for future Marvel characters like Spider-Man and Wolverine. The series was deeply personal to Kirby, combining monsters, romance, and superheroes, with Susan Storm named after his own daughter and Ben Grimm serving as his proxy, sharing his Lower East Side upbringing, and even his childhood gang inspired the Yancey Street Gang in the comics. Kirby also created Galactus and the Silver Surfer, though the latter involves some controversy I'll address later. And also something to take note of, following two unsuccessful film series by Fox, including a notoriously bad 2015 reboot, the rights to the Fantastic Four returned to Marvel Studios after Disney acquired Fox. Marvel announced a new film in 2020. The director of this project, Matt Shakman, who also directed WandaVision, who replaced original director John Watts. Shakman's vision for the movie is inspired by the optimism of the 1960s space race, drawing heavily from the Douglas Miller's 2019 documentary of the Apollo 11. Shakman has proved to have a nuanced eye for its specific tone and humorous family dynamics. Now, as we go straight into the movie from a 1960s styled Marvel title card, the letters of Marvel on zigzagging panels is 60s title design that we also saw on Hollywood's Cinema Dome when it opened in 1963. And it's obviously set in the early 1960s when Kirby and Lee first created the Fantastic Four inside of the Silver Age of comics, but it's a version of the 1960s with a retro futuristic aesthetic where people drive flying cars or cars with these bubble domes that the Fantastic Four had. An establishing shot shows us the Baxter Building in New York City, which curves downward to extend to the Excelsior launch pad in the East River. Excelsior is the name of the Fantastic Four's ship in the movie, renamed from the Marvel One in the comics. Excelsior was the catchphrase of Stan Lee, and it's also the New York State motto, meaning ever upward. The Baxter Building is the longtime headquarters of the Fantastic Four, and in 2022's Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness in Earth 838, in that universe with the Illuminati and that Reed Richards, they worked inside of the Baxter Foundation.
Sure, must know a lot about the multiverse. You got someone going around naming realities.
Yes. Me. I'm a senior fellow with the Baxter Foundation.
This alternate history, Susan Storm's efforts through the Future Foundation have led to global demilitarization and world peace. Instead of NASA, which was a U.S. government agency formed as part of the United States Cold War with the Soviet Union, the government space agency in this film is ANS. As we then open on Reed, played by Pedro Pascal, frantically looking for a yellow iodine, we can see a fantastic suit on the bed. On the floor, we see a pair of boots, pants with a belt inside of it, and a Fantastic Four jumpsuit, which, based on the frantic placement here, looks like Reed and Sue were either involved in relations or the team just came back from a battle. As he opens the drawers, we can see elastoplast, a form of medical bandage, an older tin version of Band-Aids, toothbrushes, him and hers, and makeup products, which obviously means that we're looking inside or on the side of Sue. Reed in the past had been played by Ewan Griffith in the 2005 and 2007 films, by Miles Teller in the 2015 film, and by John Krasinski in 2022's Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness.
Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four.
Fantastic Four. Didn't you guys chart in the 60s?
In a short-lived role in the 838 universe as a member of the Illuminati, who was quickly killed by Scarlet Witch. In addition to his elasticity, Reed Richards is considered Marvel's smartest character, which actually is his real superpower, by the way. In this movie, Matt Shakman described him as, quote, a combination of Steve Jobs, Albert Einstein, and Robert Moses. Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple Computers, which, by the way, has a whole other backstory in itself, but I won't get into that. Albert Einstein, the genius behind the theory of relativity, and Robert Moses, the great urban planner behind much of the architecture of New York, which is why in this film, Reed feels like a really close second or close right-hand man to someone that would be in power in government specifically. And it's also why when he speaks, the entire world, or at least New York, seems to listen. When Sue asks what he's looking for, he says, I'm looking for yellow iodine, which now brings me to a spotlight for Sue Storm, aka the Invisible Woman. So, Sue Storm, aka the Invisible Woman, is played in this movie by Vanessa Kirby, known for her roles in The Crown and the White Widow in the Mission Impossible movies. Sue Storm was played by Jessica Alba in 2005 and 2007, and by Kate Mara in 2015, but the character as written in this version shows Sue Storm in what I would say is her full administrative potential. As the leader of the Future Foundation, a global peacekeeping organization similar to the UN that has actually achieved worldwide demilitarization and peace. Sue's powers include invisibility and projecting a powerful force field around people, around their heads specifically, or around falling debris, or herself. Vanessa Kirby said they did a lot of research in the way light refracts, and that's why her force field in this movie has a rainbow effect going on inside of it.
Into it is quite addictive.
Really?
Yeah, it's like if you look at crazy cosmos space images from NASA, you know, you get really into it. I did it because I don't know, when you have to pretend you have superpowers, and Sue Storm has these kind of force fields that she can move, I mean, you feel a bit silly, kind of, especially because there's, you know, hundreds of crew and just you and the camera, and you have to be like, ooh, you know what I mean? You feel a little bit silly, so I tried to understand it from a scientific, like how, if your atoms were actually changed by cosmic radiation, how would you genuinely alter frequency? You know, and if you think about microwaves or radio waves, all those things that you can't see, but they exist, but we just can't see them with the human eye. So I had to try and, so anyway, while I'm doing this, I'm imagining all these quantum physics, science laws
The fun banter between the two of them shows up early in this exchange, detailing what most couples are like, especially after being married for some time. Husbands look for things in specific places, creatures of habit, while wives usually find those things based on their knowledge of them because they move them. Sue asks for 12 seconds while looking at a pregnancy test, suggesting that she's either been looking at this for at least 1 to 3 minutes, and Reed has been frantically looking for the iodine for that long, or because of the advanced tech, it only takes 12 seconds and she's counting down. Home pregnancy tests weren't really invented though until 1967, and this movie's set at least inside of 1965. But because of Reed's influence on this reality, a lot of science has leapt forward, similar to what we saw in Universe 838 in Doctor Strange in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, where New York is way more advanced and green and then has machines that tell or reveal your past to everyone standing around you. Violating HIPAA laws much?
That's legal.
Specific numbers of seconds actually play an interesting role in this film. The brand of the test is Storkshire, one of the many in-universe specific brands we see throughout the film. Before shooting this film, though, Matt Shakman directed Marvel's WandaVision Disney Plus series, which also features a memorable pregnancy and labor delivery. In episode 3 specifically, where Wanda saw a stork walking around in her house that was widely speculated to be, oh, how wrong we all were. In their exchange, after coming to grips with their good news, Reed mentions that they tried for 2 years and then practically gave up and stopped talking about it, which is possibly why Johnny and Ben are so happy when they find out later, because they've been on this silent journey with them for a while. Reed, remembering what happened during their most recent space flights, quickly starts panicking because of their mutations, thinking the worst of what could become of their new baby, and really has no clue about what he's saying in this moment, since comic-wise, Franklin does become an Omega level mutant in the Marvel comics, which this could be the background or the groundwork being laid for the X-Men and mutant kind in the MCU. When Reed later says monitoring for cosmic effects, Sue says nothing is going to change, which seems like a hint to the audience that Reed is in this moment mathematically creating scenarios where their child or Sue can be harmed and how he can stop it before it actually starts. But this line actually gets reversed later in the film when the couple in another intimate moment laments everything is going to change. The mention of cell mutation and cosmic effects is Reed referring to how both of their physiologies were warped by cosmic radiation. Then we see a special broadcasting ABC logo, which is shown here because Disney. And underneath that, you can see the listing for ABC's copyright and the original name of the broadcasting company, whose trade name is also known as Group W. Here, the world is celebrating 4 years of the Fantastic Four, making their original voyage in 1961 and making this 1965 in this alternate universe. Then what looks to be the original Fantastic Four logo is shown, and the Ted Gilbert Show, which is a play on the Ed Sullivan Show, shows that this story is to celebrate the team's 4th year, meaning that they began in 1961, like I previously said, just like in the comics. And that means that Galactus arrives in 1965, also just like in the comics. Galactus and Silver Surfer first appeared for the Galactus Trilogy arc, spanning Fantastic Four issues 48, 49, and 50, which was meant to be a celebration and anniversary for the team. I should also note that stories like this were very rare back then. Comic books were always meant to be accessible to people, so they almost never had a story arc that spanned more than 2 issues. We're introduced to the 4 of them, which now pictures Johnny Storm, played by Joseph Quinn, who recently was Eddie in Stranger Things, and Ben Grimm is played and mocapped by Eben Moss Barack. Now, this is actually his second Marvel world, though, Remember, he played Micro in the Netflix Punisher show, which is now officially the canonical MCU backstory since Frank Castle is in Daredevil Born Again and gets his own special presentation. Actually, Micro's surname of Lieberman came from Stan Lee's birth name of Stanley Martin Lieber, but a lot of you probably know him for his roles on Ander and in The Bear. In this movie, I love that they gave a nod to the Bear fact specifically by putting him in the kitchen for his first scene. So, Ben comes from the Yancey Street gang, who would later bully him for going big time and leaving his roots behind. Ben, however, in the comics was a World War II Air Force pilot before becoming an astronaut. And when the cosmic radiation results in his impenetrable orange rocky flesh, unlike the other three, Ben is unable to hide his powers, bringing him some shame, which is why Reed made the decision to make all of them celebrities so that he wouldn't feel left out. Now, his only scene as a human comes in the newsreel footage, which is shot in 4:3 aspect ratio on 16mm film to show how this is really archived documentary footage, which is something Shakeman would often do within episodes of WandaVision. Ben is actually kind of shy and makes a joke that he is the best looking astronaut. Now, there's a little bit more to this than you might think. The Fantastic Four got their powers when their ship was struck with cosmic rays, but those powers manifested based on their personalities. They actually explained this in the 1994 Roger Corman film, and they actually never intended to release that film, by the way. And of course, there's a good documentary out there about it. But the cast of this movie did finally get their flowers because they cameo in this film. The then Ben Grimm actor Michael Paley Smith appears here as a firefighter, and all four appear here thanking the Fantastic Four. It is nice that they finally got to be in a movie that was actually released. Matt Shakeman shot all of this footage with the cast in pre-production as it was cut together with previs animation to form a concept trailer that was shown at last year's San Diego Comic-Con in 2024. Among the photo shoots of the flight crew, though, we see the team recreating the poses of Joe Casey and Chris Weston's Fantastic Four, where the first family comic cover from 2006 shows Johnny putting the bunny ears behind Reed's head. The documentary montage explains how the flight crew ran into unforeseen events, but we don't see any video of that, only the audio that the mission control would have recorded. So that's probably the exact moment Ben's physiology shifted into its nightmarish form, which Reed further explains in the Talking Head interview. But we then see the space shuttle floating in the ocean after re-entry, and Ben Grimm's rock fist punches out of the hatch. But also, to go back to a point that I mentioned earlier about the earlier Fantastic Four films, believe it or not, this movie has nods to all of those films that I'm going to talk more about as we go along. In fact, Marvel released a list of movies that you should have watched before watching this one, which includes the 2005 and 07 movies and also the 2015. I should also mention that their powers were originally meant to represent the four elements, with Sue being wind and Reed representing water, and obviously Ben being earth and Johnny being fire. So, in the newsreel footage, Reed reveals that he and Sue were already married when they went up in the rocket. This is unlike in the comics, though, where they weren't married until Fantastic Four Annual Number 1, since for a time, Sue was actually enamored with Namor. This was also one of the many issues where Stan Lee and Jack Kirby cameo appearances as themselves. They were the guys who were not allowed to enter their wedding. And later in this movie, we do get cameos from Stan and Jack proxies. They're next to a post which reads, "Og lives again," and Og was one of Kirby's monster creations in the 1950s. Now, notice that they also have Fantastic Four comic pages on their walls. This is because the Stan and Jack proxies in the comics actually did create the in-universe Fantastic Four comic book, which is also something similar to what shown with Cap in the first Avenger. There was even one issue where Doctor Doom came into their office, and the rocket they took off in is similar to the rocket from the original story in the comics. But here's a detail that's pretty easy to miss if you're not necessarily looking for it. It's really important for the film, though. This opening also points out that everyone on the team is a scientist, even Johnny. This is why later in the movie, Johnny is able to decipher the language of the Silver Surfer. But this origin recap is all pre-roll for their appearance on the Ted Gilbert Show, which is a stand-in for the Ed Sullivan Show in our actual reality. Now, if you were born in the late 80s like I was, Ed Sullivan was not necessarily on TV for you in the actual run. So I had to go and do some research about this specifically, and Ed Sullivan was the biggest show on television for more than a decade, debuting the Beatles and Elvis and other acts like that. But I will say, everything in the movie is very colorful, very 1960s, even down to Reed and Sue's bedroom with all the circles and the vibrant colors that you see in the beginning of the movie where Reed is frantically looking for the iodine. But Sue doesn't necessarily have 1960s hair until we see these later images in the end credits. In the montage, we see the team fight against the Mole Man's monster Giganto, reproducing the cover of Fantastic Four issue 1. The Thing is even wearing a full body uniform like he did in early issues of the comic. Now, the Mole Man is played by Paul Walker Hauser, who you might know from Cobra Kai. Just like in the comics, he wears these glasses to protect his eyes from sunlight. And if you're interested in seeing how all this played out, you might want to go check the Marvel prequel comic for this film. That comic also shows why Herbie likes Sue so much and why she is able to negotiate with him so well later on in the movie. This newspaper talks about how the president has taken a diplomatic trip to Subterranea, and here's a news item about Ben speaking at the Heisman Awards because he was a football star. In fact, he went to college on a football scholarship, and that's where he met Reed Richards, who is also low-key his best friend. Now, there is a montage of the Fantastic Four fighting other villains from the comics as well, including the Mad Thinker and the Red Ghost and his Super Apes. Now, the Red Ghost was originally played by John Malkovich. We saw him in the first trailer, but his role has been cut from the movie. Maybe he was originally going to help against Galactus because it would be kind of silly to cast John Malkovich for a one-off role. In an opening, the Mole Man collapses the Pan Am building, which in real life was renamed to the MetLife building after Pan Am went bankrupt in the 1980s. Now, this is also the building that was remodeled into becoming Avengers Tower. So this is a subtle way to show how this timeline is very different from the 616 universe. Sue is a diplomat who brokers peace with the Mole Man and his kingdom of Subterranea while founding something called the Future Foundation. Now, in the movie, as a kind of United Nations, but in the comics, it was a think tank. It was created to gather super genius children from all around the world, including androids, clones, and mole people, to think of outside-of-the-box solutions in order to help the world. But there's a really interesting shot in this scene where the camera pans past delegates and we see that Latveria is not present. Obviously, Doom did appear in the mid-credits scene, but we don't know if this is a Doom from another universe or if it's a Dr. Doom from this world. We just have to wait for Avengers Doomsday to find out. By the way, the Fantastic Four's version of the Human Torch is not actually the very first type or shadow of the Human Torch in Marvel Comics, specifically before they were actually Marvel Comics at all, because the Human Torch is actually featured in the very first issue or very first comic released by Timely Comics, which became Marvel, in the first comic that also features Namor. But the robot Herbie was actually created to take the place of Johnny Storm in the cartoon that I just mentioned. So it's nice to see Herbie actually join the team, kind of, in this movie. Herbie stands for Humanoid Experimental Robot B-Type Integrated Electronics. And in this movie, believe it or not, Herbie is a practical effect because they built a wooden Herbie puppet and then augmented his features with CGI, which you can see based on the end credits that mention puppeteers for Herbie. There was also a remote controlled version which was powered by a lawnmower battery, according to special effects supervisor Alistair Williams, as reported in the Empire magazine. Herbie's voice is also made from the voice modulation tech from this era. And we also see later on his eyes are programming reel-to-reel tapes from the 1960s. This is similar to the magnetic tape that Arnim Zola used to store his consciousness in The Winter Soldier. One data tape is labeled home and the second tape is labeled space. And then we see the Human Torch makes a big 4 in the sky, which the Fantastic Four always uses as a kind of bat signal to summon the team together. And then he flies by a billboard featuring himself for Coppertone sunscreen. Notice that we see a red and yellow 4 logo, and it's a kind of futuristic billboard. It's animated and there's a fire effect, but it's not in a modern LCD screen. So this shows us that in some ways, this version of the 1960s is more advanced, but in other ways, it's still very far behind our current technology. In fact, there are so many background details and product placements in this entire movie that I'm just going to take some time to go through them all right now. Starting with, the skyline is a mix of futuristic buildings and classic Art Deco, featuring the Chrysler Building, which is where Thor bottlenecked the Atari invaders in the Avengers in 2012, and this building with an orb on top of it is similar to Sentry Tower in the comics, which was adapted to become Avengers Tower in the MCU. And there's also a monorail running through Manhattan. Monorails, if you don't know, are light trains that at one point futurists thought would be the model of world transportation. So when Walt Disney designed this world of tomorrow in Epcot Center monorails were included. And it's true, monorails did have their time. They put cities like Brockway and Ogdenville and North Haverhill on the map. But there are no monorails in Manhattan, which New York actually takes the approach of the Subterranea specifically because of subway systems. Here, though, we see a store called Westview Television, which is a nod to Westview from the show WandaVision, which was, of course, directed by Matt Shakman. There are also subtle touches that show how the Fantastic Four space exploration have captivated the entire country. We also see an ad for a Hoover grill, probably one of Reed's patents that made him a wealthy man. Reed also probably created the flying cars that the police use, perfecting on the design that Howard Stark just could not get right. And in Times Square, we also see movies like Attack of the Fungi, which is a little nod to the film's parent company of Disney. And later in the movie, the marquees all change to messages that support reading things like "Good luck, Fantastic Four." I loved how alive and connected to the Fantastic Four the people of this world are. That people are so willing to shut down their everyday lives in entertainment in pursuit of a better society. The optimism in this movie really stems from the early 1960s, where JFK promised to put a man on the moon before the end of the decade. Now, one thought I did have about this movie was that since the Fantastic Four are able to introduce flying cars and unite everyone around the world, were they also able to help with all of the tumultuous problems of the 1960s? Was JFK still shot? Did the Fantastic Four help fix civil rights? Did we actually go to Vietnam? In the very first promo art, we do see Ben reading Life magazine with Lyndon Johnson on the cover, so presumably JFK was still shot. But in general, the movie seems to be saying that the 1960s carried through with the optimism of Johnson's Great Society, because the whole world coming together against Galactus even helped to cool Cold War tensions and end the Vietnam War. The policies of the Johnson administration, which wanted to, among other things, end poverty in America. All of this fun optimism is squashed when the Surfer interrupts and easily wrecks every teleporter except for one. To get to her, Johnny plays the records from Zenla and then makes her confront her past crimes when she destroys countless other worlds for her master. Then we see flashbacks of Shalabal and her family on Zenla, and we learn that she is a mother. After skipping through to the end credits, after Franklin revives his mother and brings her back to life, the end credits are designed in a style reminiscent of Saul Bass, who did credits for movies like Psycho, and then we get the mid-credit scene, which I'll thoroughly break down in a separate video, but now we didn't know that this was Robert Downey Jr. in the beginning in terms of Doctor Doom, or maybe a Doctor Doom variant from this universe, but we can see that Dr. Doom has removed his mask and Franklin is touching his face. Maybe he's letting Franklin heal his face, or this is simply a show of trust. Either way, if Doom's plan is to restart the multiverse, then he can use a god baby like Franklin to create a new universe that he can rule. Now, this scene was directed by the Russo brothers, by the way, meaning that it could be a scene lifted straight from Avengers Doomsday. And I don't know if you caught this, but the end credits have a score credit for Alvar Silvestri called Doom. And there was a final scene showing the Fantastic Four cartoon in this universe where they fight another classic villain, the android Dragon Man. But I mostly enjoyed the fact that the credits included a tribute to Jack the King Kirby. His quote read, "If you look at my characters, you will find me. Kirby died in 1994, so he didn't live to see so many of his creations on the big screen. Like we have spent the last 30 years or so celebrating Stan Lee, but I don't think Kirby gets enough credit for originating so many of these great ideas. He was the visionary man with talent and imagination who not only co-created the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, but also created Darkseid and the New Gods for DC. So I love that they paid tribute to him by naming this universe after his birthday. And that's pretty much everything that I found inside of my deep dive into this movie. Did I miss anything? Leave that down in the comments. And if you're new around here, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and share this with a friend. And until next time, y'all be smooth. Blurred out.